China EVs and more, where my co-host Lei Xing and I will go over the week's most important and interesting news coming out of the China EV, AV, and mobility sectors. We will open the room up at around the 40-minute mark to anyone who's keen to ask us any questions. We have one rule: although we appreciate vigorous debate, let's all be considerate and respectful to each other. What Lei and I discussed today is based on our opinions and should not be taken as investment advice. Even if it sounds like investment advice, it isn't. We encourage those who enjoy this room to please connect with us on LinkedIn, get the word out to your friends, and of course, tune in again next week. My name is Tu and Lei, and I am the managing director at Sino-Auto Insights, a Beijing-based consultancy that helps organizations bring innovative and tech-focused products and services to the transportation and mobility sectors. I write a free weekly newsletter that we pull many of our discussion topics from, and you can sign up for it at sinoautoinsights.com, which of course I encourage you all to do. Lei, can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi all. My name is Lei, and I am the former chief editor of China Auto Review, which published newsletters and the only tabloid magazine in English focused exclusively on the Chinese auto market. Pre-pandemic, I spent pretty much 20 years on the ground in China covering the industry. Since the pandemic, I've been in the US as an independent analyst consultant, looking afar and still trying to keep tabs on the rapidly evolving market. This is episode number 43, and today's a special day. On the same day that Grab gets listed on NASDAQ,
IPO.
DD starts delisting process from the NYSE. We'll probably talk a little bit about that later on, but it's hard to believe that there's less than a month to go for 2021, isn't it? Where did all the time go?
Oh, man.
Anyway, it's
a blur, yeah. COVID blur.
It's early in the month, which, as you know, is also our favorite time of the month because EV sales are out. And boy, were they hot for November. Bananas, as you would say, too. We'll get to dissect some of the numbers in a second. Li Auto reported Q3 earnings on Monday and shared some additional updates on product plans. Baidu and Pony AI became the first AV companies in China to get that coveted permits to conduct paid robotaxi service in Beijing.
Yeah, Beijing's a big deal.
Some other key announcements since our last episode worth mentioning is Xiaomi's confirmation of its EV manufacturing facility in Beijing. Big news in the solid-state battery space with the Factorial Energy, a company based in my neck of neighborhood, getting investments from Daimler and Stellantis. Polestar just announced today the next move with the Polestar 3, which will be produced in the US and China. And Mercedes-Benz, by the way, confirmed its 60 billion euro investment round for the next 5 years. And yet another 2 new smart EV brands from China.
And I'm going to plant a seed.
AITO, which stands for Add Intelligence to Auto, jointly established by Huawei and SoCon, the parent company of Ceres, and the Neutron, Niutron, from the Li Yinan, the guy who started New Scooters, right? Expected to officially unveil December 15th. And so New
didn't technically get into, because Yan Li was being asked consistently whether or not they were going to get into vehicles. So New didn't get into vehicles, but an ex-co-founder did.
Yeah, and this guy went to prison for insider trading for like 3.5 years. And then he came out and then started a New, and then now he's doing another venture. But anyways, the November numbers. So my question to you, what's your initial reaction once those numbers were out yesterday or the day before your time?
I think nothing too surprising. To me, it's chalk. To me, it's like expected. I think XPeng hitting just over 15,000 units. That's, a pretty big psychological win for them. And, Li Auto at 13,500. I think for one vehicle, that's pretty substantial. And we're seeing the struggle with them really making the jump and leap in sales that I think XPeng will see once the P5 gets ramped. The constraint of only having one vehicle in the market, although it seems to be a pretty popular vehicle, incrementally increasing sales quarter over quarter. But if you're going to compete with the other two Chinese EV companies that are publicly traded out west, then you need to constantly be in the news with new products, new services. And so I'm hoping that their next product that'll probably be launched in April at the Beijing Auto Show is going to be pretty substantial. So how about you?
Likewise, one of expected. We knew they were ramping up, so to say, for that big month of numbers. I think XPeng was a little bit surprising because we kind of talked about it last episode that you expected they would hit 15,000 in December, but they got it in November. And Li Auto, I think, is all the more significant because it's doing that with just the one, right? While all the other ones are doing it with multiple models. And the other surprise, I guess, was Neta, which is the only one among, I have a chart on the big six that has seen month-on-month growth for 9 consecutive months. So they're the only consistent one who's getting more every month. So a little bit of surprises and expected, but I think I'm going to throw some cold water on these companies. Even though we've seen these numbers, they're very good, right? The big six, my count was nearly 50,000 units. That's approximately 1/8 of the market, which I expected total market to be over 400,000 units, by the way.
Right.
So we talked about this many episodes, is we're still looking for that consistency, okay? So far, if you look at XPeng, they've done 3 consecutive months of 10,000 units. I think XPeng right now is the one to beat among all of these startups. NIO is choppy. Li Auto is a little bit of choppy. But we want to see these companies consistently do well. And that means at a certain threshold. And we don't want to see 1 month 15,000 units and then the next month dropping to some other number way below.
Yeah, because that's sales tricks, right? If it goes up and down like that, that's just sales incentives or something that's causing
right.
that.
So what we're still kind of looking for that consistency and look like so far only Neta has done it in terms of doing it month in and month out.
I should say really quickly, Lei, that I'd spoken to a couple of my moles, and I got the impression that XPeng could have actually got a bit more than 15,613 units had it not been for some supply constraints. So looks to me like December for many of these automakers still could be fairly challenging. So although they're hitting new milestones on sales numbers, I almost feel there's a ceiling due to a bit of the supply uncertainty.
The situation at XPeng that they could have done even more had there not been all these constraints. I think that was what you were alluding to.
Yeah. I don't think that's just an XPeng thing.
Yeah, and I talked a little bit about Ouyang Minggao, his predictions about next year being 5 million units. And that's based on the current battery chip and capacity constraints. And actual demand is a lot higher than that number. So that's what I said.
5 million.
Yeah, which is my prediction as well, because it's only a 50% growth from 3.3 million this year.
So right now, I read a statistic that said China has around 60% of total EV share globally for October.
More than 50%, that's for sure.
Yeah. So do we believe that the current capacity, let's set aside supply issues, because I've said this numerous times, that capacity issues and supply issues are two completely different things. If there's not enough capacity, then that takes time, investment to add to the system. Whereas supply is just people can't manufacture fast enough, and or there's a cause for that slowdown or stoppage of production. So do we believe that there is enough domestic capacity in the battery cell manufacturing across the board to accommodate 5 million units? I don't know. I'm not sure yet. I guess it would be good to get a battery cell person in here.
Well, I think the script is going to be flipped for next year. So I think the chip, I believe that based on what I'm hearing and what people from these OEMs are talking about, the worst of the chip crisis is probably behind us. But now the battery side of it, battery cell side of it is still an issue. So these numbers, I mean, they're phenomenal, right? 5 million units, 3.3 million this year, 5 million next year. These are all based on these constraints that are in place, based on the current scenarios.
Right.
So it's definitely not a demand issue.
Yeah.
But I think battery will probably, the constraint will be more of an issue than chip next year.
I think so too.
Yeah.
You know, I forget her name now, but one of the commerce secretaries, or the second in command of commerce, she did say in the United States anyways, that there needed to be immediate investment in chip manufacturing in the United States. So they do see that as a potential constraint, and that needs to be addressed today. I think they had put a bill up for $56 billion in help to get chip manufacturing jump started in the US. And so I think that is that they don't want to rely on Taiwan. I think there's national security implications with that, but also because there's going to be demand coming from China, Europe, and the United States. And so if they have to get in line, that puts the US manufacturers at a disadvantage in the United States. And so, you know,
and if you look at some of the numbers I've seen out of at least the big three from NIO, XPeng, and Li Auto, that they expect next year delivery volumes to pretty much double from this year. So XPeng is going to get real close to 100,000. So they're planning 200,000 next year. NIO is probably going to be 160,000, 170,000. But and all of them, remember, they're all adding capacity, right? XPeng has 3 plants planned. NIO is doing the NIO Park, right, in addition to Hefei, and Li Auto is doing the Beijing plant. Remember, so their capacity, but that's, also eyeing out to 2023. So by then, the capacity-wise, they'll be good. It's at least 400,000, 500,000 units capacity. That's at least twice what they're going to, deliver next year.
Here's my take. Here's my take on some of that, because right now it's probably started a month ago. So business planning for the next 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years. He Xiaopeng said that entering Europe, it's going to take 10 years for them to gain any real traction, right? So when you're saying they're adding capacity next year, that's for domestic consumption primarily, right? They're going to go very slowly in the next 18 months, 20 months for European expansion. They kind of alluded to that. Now, automakers are also notoriously conservative when it comes to certain forecasts or predictions that they're going to make. So they're probably sandbagging a little bit, but I think they're making honest predictions based on all the uncertainty from 2021, right? Chips, batteries, and COVID. So
and
this is really quickly, this is new to William Li and He Xiaopeng, right? They're software guys, and so they're not used to having to plan out 5, 6, 7, 8 years from a capital standpoint, right? I'd written an AmCham opinion piece 3 years ago, actually. It's called the Driverless Duel, and I said, and I'm oversimplifying this, but tech companies think in terms of operating expense from a financial standpoint, right? The period that the expenses incurred it's recognized. Whereas automotive guys have to think in terms of 5-year and 10-year because,
Right.
a $2 billion investment in a factory needs 10 years to amortize, right? And so how you to make decisions and how you approach challenges is completely different. And so this must be newer for He Xiaopeng and William Li and even Lei Jun, right? To kind of think through,
Yeah. But again, back to the numbers, I think one of the reaction that I had was for those of, for probably for you and me at least, and for those that have followed the industry long enough, when you go back 10, 12 years to when China's whole NEV games got started, I don't think anyone, would have foreseen that 2020, 2021, that these smart EV startups would be, would be leading this charge, right? If we look at the numbers, they're they're not consistent, but at least they're going up, and it's the incumbents that are trying to catch up, and that's why one of the topics that's why we're also seeing these new brands come up, right? Is to kind of emulate what NIO or what XPeng, what Li Auto has done, and trying to be relevant. So that's
and the irony is, Lei, that as expensive as it is, because I tweeted a few minutes ago how expensive it is to launch a new vehicle brand, right? But historically, it's never been cheaper, right? It's $500 million, $700 million, and I'm throwing these numbers around like, yeah, I have it in my wallet. But I obviously, with being able to partner with a contract manufacturer in the automotive space and then just being either a software designer and developer and integrator, it makes it much cheaper. And we're seeing a bit of that because there's, we're 3 or 4 years into this growth cycle for EVs in China and brands are still popping up. So obviously investors and entrepreneurs still see opportunity in the market. So you and I know that only a handful, 6, 7 brands are probably going to travel well outside of China. But we have to remember that 2030 is forecasted to be a 30 million vehicle market in China. So there's plenty of money to be made inside China as well. And so we talk about a lot. We mostly talk about 6, 7, 8, 9 brands, but we're going to see BYD 10, 15, 20 years from now as a freaking pioneer of EVs and of batteries, right? And they're going to be talked likely alongside like a Ford who pioneered mass production, right? Because this is the coolest part. And really quickly, again, yesterday I had the pleasure of presenting to the British Embassy, the commercial team from the British Embassy. And, one of the questions was a pretty thoughtful question. He was like, do we think we need these Chinese EV companies to enter the foreign markets in order to get growth moving along? And I thought that there aren't enough brands in the US and the EU from the domestic side. So there needs to be more competition, more brands to bring the excitement. It can't just be Tesla globally. And so, what do you think? Do you think that the Chinese EV companies need to go to these foreign markets in order to get or help get these EV markets kickstarted in the US? The EU is doing fine, but I don't see any Lucids or Rivians coming out of the EU. And I only see those 2 coming out of the US. So what do you think about in order to get growth to the China levels in the EU and the United States?
I guess the answer is yes and no. For Europe, yes. For the US, we already have the similar, the counterparts to the Chinese smart EV startups, which are the Lucids, the Rivians, the Fiskars, the Faraday Futures, right? It's almost like a mirror image. So, but, as we talked before, Europe is somewhat easier from a geopolitical standpoint. And back to the sales, right. If the big 3 had their recent earnings calls, and I think often they mention that for Europe now, and maybe even, next year, volume is not the concern, but just to build a brand, right? build the business model, like what NIO is doing, and go from there. And they expand, Norway as an entry point, and they expand out slowly. I don't think we're going to see any significant percentage of sales that are going to come from Europe. And I think the US, it's BYD is already here in some way.
There's a long shadow. BYD has a long shadow in the United States.
Yeah, eventually. So yeah, I guess yes and no. And we also have to talk about these other players that ID, right? Volkswagen ID. They've done over 14,000 units. The GAC Ion, right? Close to 15,000 units. Wuling, right? Wuling came out with the numbers yesterday. The Mini EV, 45,000.
In 2022, there's going to be a lot of Mini EV clones. So they're already kind of launching now.
So this dumbbell effect is still going to continue a bit. So the lower end of it and the premium end of it. And that's why you see all these premium brands coming out. Is trying to play into that segment of the market.
Well, I'm just going to call this out, Lei. You and I have both heard that there's going to be at least one more brand being launched, and it's going to be ultra premium. It's not just going to be premium. It's going to be competing against a Rolls-Royce and a Bentley. And this is coming out of Beijing. So stay tuned. We will tell you more about it in the next few weeks.
The Itos, the avatars, the neutrons. They're not the first, and they're not going to be last. And if we look at some of the predictions again made by Ouyang Mingao, right? He said next year, China's NEV penetration will reach 20% for 4 years, and even 30% or more in some months. So remember, China's target is to achieve 20% penetration by 2025.
It's going to get smashed.
Based on the latest NEV industry development plan. So that's going to be, I think, smashed for sure next year. Because this year, we're going to be around probably 13% for the year. But in certain months, like, November, around 17%. So very close already to that percentage. And further out, 7 to 9 million in 2025, 17 to 19 million in 2030. And, some of the NEV park, so number of NEVs on the roads will surpass 30 million by 2025, 100 million by 2030, 200 million 2035, and 250 million 2040. These are all given by Ouyang Mingao at their press conference.
Just crazy numbers, right? And we have to kind of explain a bit of this simple math. It's a little bit easier to achieve those take rates because the ICE vehicle sales has fallen a bit. So if we were at still a decent growth trajectory in overall passenger vehicle sales, we probably wouldn't be hitting that 13% for the entire year. It'd probably be closer to 11 or 12. But depending on whether the ICE market in 2022 picks up growth again, and Toyota and Volkswagen are counting on that, then that makes it more difficult, more challenging to achieve that 20%. Not saying it's impossible and it won't happen, but as ICE sales regain some of that positive momentum, it'll make getting to 20% harder.
But here's the thing. I think this switch has already taken place. So I think I probably said this last or the previous episode that it would be weird if you launch an all new model that's an ICE model nowadays. Look at all the product launches and announcements.
Besides Ford and Lincoln, you mean?
Well, I mean, those are exceptions maybe, but do you see any significant new model launches that are not in some way electrified? No, right?
The crazy thing is, Lei, is that I'm 100% certain. I don't know, but I'm 100% certain that internally VW is seeing that too. And they're like, holy shit, if we don't sell 4 million units, 3.5 million units of ICEs, then we are in a lot of trouble worldwide. Right. And so I guarantee you they're seeing these numbers internally, because I'm in complete agreement. We've turned that corner. We've reached that tipping point.
To use a football analogy, I feel like this is like the 2-minute warning for these incumbents that they got to get their game together and make something happen. Otherwise, the game's over.
Because, people, just 3 years ago, Volkswagen insiders are joking around, oh, we should acquire this company or we should acquire that company. I'm like, you know what? In about 5 years, somebody's going to be joking around about acquiring you. So I wouldn't make these kinds of jokes, because it's going to be challenging, because they're struggling here on both sides, right? Because 14,000 for 4 products is, especially with the marketing machine and the retail footprint that they have, it's, it has to be pretty disappointing. And we've talked about this in the past. They're finger pointing, right? Already. So
yeah. So let's move to Baidu and Pony AI a little bit quickly. What do you see there? I mean,
I see. So I'll talk in particular about the Baidu announcements, because we just earlier this year, a friend of China EVs and More, Will, he and I went down to Yizhuang, checked out some of their robo-taxis in the depot. We saw the first W6, was it? And so with Apollo launching a paid service in Beijing, again, I think we're reaching this tipping point. And then Robin Lee saying we're going to be in 25 cities by 2025, and we're going to be in 100 cities by 2030. And I think one of the key, and mark it down, folks, one of the key indicators of how fast and aggressive autonomous pilots will happen is the cost per mile. So Apollo has already gotten each vehicle to around $500,000 RMB, which is give or take 75,000 US dollars. So that cost per mile has been Wei Dong, who's the head of the Apollo team. He had said they've gotten it down by 60% already. Okay. I don't know what that target number for Apollo is, but if they can get it down to 40, 45, under 50, under 40,000, we're going to see autonomous vehicles all over the place in China. So they're counting on that by saying 100 cities by 2030. That's just a massive number. And that means that they were able to deploy capital pretty efficiently, meaning that there's a lot of cars on the road that they were able to manufacture very cheaply. With currently they're 3-part. Okay. So what did you hear about Pony?
Well, my read is this. This is as much a win for Baidu and Pony AI as it is for the city of Beijing. Okay. So this is the first tier 1 city in China to allow for paid robotaxi commercialization. So remember, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, they're all fighting. Get that point. So this is a win for Beijing. But, obviously Baidu is based in Beijing, so a lot of leverage there. And the other two things, I think, aside from the robotaxi operation itself, is I don't think people talk about this much, but it's important, is the rules in place. 1, both the safety driver and the application entity are responsible for accidents. Okay. And 2, no less than renminbi 5 million traffic compulsory insurance, right. No less than renminbi 2 million per seat insurance, and no less than renminbi 2 million insurance per person. This is clearly stated in the rules for operating these vehicles in the so-called Beijing ICV policy pilot zone.
Oh,
okay. So I think these are important things to bear in mind. Whereas we always often talk about who's responsible, and this is pretty clear cut. So it places a lot of burden on the safety drivers.
I can.
Yeah.
We can imply or infer who they're also communicating to indirectly, right? we know that Tesla is much more conservative when it comes to launching FSD, the beta, and there's nobody. Well, I won't say nobody. There aren't a lot of live streamers that are testing it on Chinese roads because that liability would be there for Tesla. That liability that's here is not in the United States, and that's why we see a lot of folks live streaming what they're doing. And so this is clearly also creating ground rules for the XPengs and the Li Autos and the Neos, who are also trying to launch their level 2, level 3 ADAS systems, right?
Right, and this is the thing about the China speed is not only are these robotaxi companies moving ahead quickly with rolling out these vehicles and putting them on the roads, but at the same time, the regulatory and the policy, supporting policies are also in place very fast, or at least, we know who's responsible, what's expected. I think that's different about the China speed. Whereas I think here in the US, maybe it's a bit slower in some ways. And Tesla could be one sense of how regulators see what Tesla is doing and what they do about it, right? Yeah.
And it just so happened that this week, Robin Lee had launched his book, Intelligent Transportation, is it called?
Yeah. I think he had 2 earlier books on other industries, but this one is pretty pertinent to what we're doing.
Yeah, so I got an early draft of it from the folks at Baidu. So I'll have to brush up on my Chinese to be able to read it. It's not supposed to come out in English, so unfortunately.
I think it talks a lot about not the vehicle themselves, but really the smart traffic signals, smart cameras, smart, things like V2X that make these things happen.
And it emphasizes, so I got a sneak peek at some of the transcript for a few of the chapters. It emphasizes the common prosperity, right?
Well, obviously,
yeah, exactly. So it makes kind of democratizing transportation for everyone's benefit.
So basically, Beijing is sort of the first domino to fall, so to say. But we'll certainly see, cities like Shanghai, Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, and Shenzhen follow suit.
And you better believe that there's going to be all kinds of videos that are going to pop up.
Yeah.
Because this is also China Autonomous Vehicle Inc. Their dress rehearsal to attract foreign partners so that they can deploy pilots in other countries. Wei Dong, he was interviewed by CNBC, and he said, we are starting to look for foreign partners. So there's going to be a scenario where maybe in 2022, I could see them announcing a couple cities outside of China that they have made agreements with either an automotive firm, a partner that'll manage the robotaxis on their behalf in those countries. So they don't just have ambitions. Let's be clear about that. They don't just have ambitions inside of China. They want to fight US AV Inc. for supremacy in the countries that don't have those capabilities in countries. So
yeah, and Baidu is also sort of one of those California companies, right? They did testing. They do testing here in the US as well.
Yeah, they were early. They were early
by the California DME, right? So the auto earnings, we're not going to go into the details, into the numbers, but Li Auto is the last of the big 3 to report, right? So basically, it's Li Auto to me is the most stingy, okay, in terms of cost. How they control cost. That's why they had the highest gross margin among all 3. So
and they had pretty small losses too. So
yeah, so XPeng actually had the most losses among the 3. Neo had the most revenues. So again, we look at these delivery numbers, but then again, they're publicly listed companies. We look at other metrics and see why they are where they are at, right? And again, it's all the more significant that Li is able to rack up these numbers just with just basically one model. They hit the sweet spot. The family positioning, EREV, not worrying too much about range anxiety, taking care of kind of the end consumer concern. I think those are the reasons that they've done.
It should be noted, Lei, that with one product in the market only, the guessing game for their next product from a feature standpoint should be much more narrow than a Neo and an XPeng who are guessing a bit more because they're straddling launches one after the other.
The next model we already know is going to be even a bigger one. It's called the X01, right? It's launching next year, and basically a bigger EREV. So we already know that, again, for families. And one of the things they talked about in the earnings call was they're going to have later this month the biggest OTA update for so they have this NOA,
right?
Sort of the autopilot type of function that they're going to do an update. And they said it's the biggest ever done in China in terms of updating functions. And then at the same time, they're preparing for their next the BEV high performance, high power charging BEVs, right? The whale and the shark platforms. Remember, and those are coming in 2023, which is when the production base is operational. And I think they mentioned in the earnings call, their capacity by the end of 2023 is going to be 500,000 units and 700,000 units double shift. So
ambitious.
That's a lot more than their delivery volumes, at least for next year.
Yeah.
Let's do double, 200,000 units. And then other than that, I think it's just that their gross margin is pretty healthy, 23.3%, right? And their target is 25%. Okay. And then they also received roughly 200 million worth of credit sales. And that was in Q3.
So it is 10:50. We will keep on talking because I want to talk about the Factorial and some of the solid state stuff, recent announcements. But we can open the room up for anyone who has any questions. Please feel free to raise your hand, and we will bring you up and have a conversation with you.
And I was talking to some people about the DD delisting, and I think it's fair to put a question mark, okay, on what's going to happen with the big three that are listed here in the U.S. So my concern is, that HFCAA, the Holding Foreign Companies Accountable Act, right? They just updated this amendments, basically saying that they will need to share the percentage of shares owned by government entities, name of each official of the Chinese, the CCP, who is a board member. And I think I saw somewhere Neil kind of responded to this, basically saying that they're complying with everything so far. So they don't think that's going to happen.
But it ain't up to Neil.
But no, what I'm saying is anything that deals with customer data, I think is in a bit of a precarious situation right now. And DD for sure was one.
And we should note that sales data is considered customer data from the loosest definition, right? So the Chinese government could be like, you know what, you can't release sales data, like customer demographics and things like that, right? So if that's the case, then there's a long way between now and when the requirement. I think it's less than 2 years now, but a lot of gray area there.
Yeah, but DD debacle, this was 6 months, right? So they got listed on June 30th. I remember very clearly, right before July 1st, the big holiday, and for that to happen, and then 6 months later, they're done. It's just
so a little bit of information. I shared this with you. We talked about this week on WeChat. So my moles have told me, and I think you confirmed it as well. Plus, formerly known as Plus AI.
Plus AI, the autonomous trucking competitor to Too Simple and all of these other
that
ones.
Was supposed to SPAC IPO in the US early next year, but walked away from Hennessy, their SPAC partner. It sounds like they're going to carve out China operations, which Manbang owns most of anyways. So that could be a way of getting around having to disclose who your Chinese institutional and state-owned investors are. And so could we see that with a Pony? Could we see that with a NIO, Li Auto, and XPeng? Maybe, because we have to remember that NIO is was effectively bailed out by the Chinese government, right? A provincial government. And there's substantial investment from Li Auto, from the Beijing government, I think. So, and XPeng has Guangzhou ties as well. So
I think with the DD, what they announced today, and the HFCAA, the door is pretty much shut.
Yes.
For any potential, U.S. IPOs.
Yeah.
So
and there was that rumor earlier this week about the VIE structure being closed, but that's not true. That's
right,
not true.
And then the CSSR denied it, right? The CSRC.
That's not to say they're not making it. They're not going to make it any easier, but they're not going to close it.
Right.
So yeah, but what do you think about Factorial? So they're solid state. Mercedes and Stellantis, Factorial signed a partnership, right?
I think we have a much longer, or let's put it this way, we have a much so the expectation on SSB. Pretty much, if we look at what Henrik Fixer told me, he said it's at least another vehicle generation away. What Nissan announced, 2028. Okay. What Factorial announced with Stellantis and Mercedes is that in the case of Mercedes, they said over the next 5 years, have a small series of products introduced to market. So let's just add the numbers, 2027, 2026 earliest. And there's this huge difference between putting it out on the market in mass volumes. So that's probably going to be well beyond 2030. Yeah. So now we have the expectations that it's going to be much longer, whereas maybe just a few months or a year before with QuantumScape, right? What happened with QuantumScape? And the expectations were much higher. And even when I talked to Henrik, remember, for those of you that listened to the episode, that back in 2018, he was big on solid-state batteries. And now he's saying, no, it's not going to happen.
Not true solid state.
Yeah, exactly right. So the NIO's upcoming 150 kilowatt hour hybrid, half and half solid state, that's supplied in part by a Chinese company called Weilan. I think the English is called WeLion.
Yeah.
WeLion New Energy. I was doing a bit of research on this. So that's not what Nissan called ASSB, all solid state battery, right? So yeah, so let's just wait until the end of the decade to see any real application and mass volumes.
So
that's the expectation.
So just to be clear, for the foreseeable future, LFP batteries are going to dominate electric vehicles unless we get into the premium segment. Then we could be looking at more of the NMC or NCM batteries. I think 80% of capacity increased investment globally is going to be in LFP battery cell capacity. So, and then, but it is worth noting because there have been several major car companies, Volkswagen and with QuantumScape in the solid state. So I almost feel that these companies don't want to be emboldened long term to to Chinese battery companies a little bit, that they want to diversify out of LFP for the sake of not having to work exclusively or primarily with Chinese companies, So I don't know.
Yeah, and it's interesting that two very interesting companies in the battery space are based here in Massachusetts, Factorial and SES.
Yeah.
Right? The lithium metal.
And there's
all startups.
So that means there is going to be, in the next 10 years, going to be a lot of investment dollars in incrementally increasing the efficiency of the current battery technology, because I feel that we're not that far off from getting people comfortable, as long as the combination of charging speed, range of the battery, and either charging stations or swapping stations are within reach, because it quite literally is just a change of a habit, because we don't feel comfortable, because for 30 years we've been using a petrol engine vehicle. We know exactly where the gas stations are, and we know when we need to pump it, and it takes 4 minutes for us to do it. So if we retrain our minds and say, okay, maybe it takes 10 minutes and I'm 75% charged, they're convenient enough, or as convenient, almost as convenient as gas stations, then I can accept it as a consumer of an electric vehicle. So I think that within 2030, there's going to be potentially not this what's the right word? This need for solid state batteries, unless LFP batteries have not progressed much in 9 years.
Well, I mean, these strategic investments from Daimler, Stellantis, and Hyundai, right? Are the three companies that are involved with Factorial. They must see something.
Yeah.
Double the energy cost-wise, how they bring it down to, Nissan said, what, $65 per kilowatt hour by the end of the decade?
That brings us to the end of this week's show. Lei and I thank you for tuning in. My name is Tu Lei, and you can find me on Twitter at Sino Auto Insight. That's SinoAutoInsight. You can find Lei on Twitter at LeiXing77. That's LEIXING77. If you wouldn't mind rating and or reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you grab your podcast from, we'd appreciate that as well. Even better, if you enjoy this show, please tell your friends about it. Please join us again next week as we track down all the latest news on China, EVs, and more.